In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Houston, Texas, an unspeakable tragedy was about to unfold, one that would leave the community in shock and horror. Jennifer and Charlie, a seemingly ordinary couple, lived together with their 18-year-old daughter Melissa. Jennifer, 34 years old and known for her striking looks, spent her days as a housewife, while her husband Charlie, 39, worked long hours as an accountant. The couple appeared to have a perfect life, but behind closed doors, secrets were brewing, ones that would lead to deadly consequences. Living just across the street was Fred, a 29-year-old Nigerian-born forester. Muscular, strong, and charismatic, Fred often caught the eye of Jennifer, who found herself drawn to him. Her husband's long working hours left Jennifer feeling lonely, and it wasn't long before she started to take notice of Fred's physique and charm. Fred, aware of Jennifer's lingering glances, soon realized the power he had over her. Jennifer began dressing provocatively short skirts, low-cut tops, and would make sure Fred saw her every chance she got. It was a game of seduction, and eventually the attraction became too strong to resist. Jennifer and Fred embarked on a torrid affair that lasted for months. Almost every day, while Charlie was away at work, Jennifer and Fred would spend hours together, tangled in a secret web of lust and deceit. The affair grew bolder by the day, with the pair meeting for long sessions at Fred's home, just a few feet away from where her daughter and husband slept. For 4 months, their relationship went unnoticed. But Charlie began to grow suspicious. One night, as he tried to rekindle the romance with Jennifer, she pushed him away. That's when Charlie noticed something odd, small bruises on her body that he couldn't explain. Jennifer brushed them off, claiming they were nothing, but the seeds of doubt were already planted in Charlie's mind. He tried to track Jennifer's movements, but his demanding work schedule made it difficult to keep tabs on her during the day. Still, the strange behavior continued, and Charlie knew something was wrong. He just couldn't prove it. Then, one day, everything changed. Fred had finished work early, returning home before his usual time. Meanwhile, Melissa, Jennifer, and Charlie's daughter had come home early from school and found herself locked out of the house. Her parents were out running errands, and she had no way of getting inside. Fred, seeing Melissa standing helplessly in front of her house, offered to help. He invited her into his home, saying she could wait there until her parents returned. Unsuspecting, Melissa accepted. Inside Fred's home, things took a sinister turn. Fred offered Melissa a glass of water, but what she didn't know was that he had laced it with a sedative. Within minutes, Melissa began to feel dizzy and weak, and soon after, she collapsed unconscious. Fred carried her to his bedroom, where he committed an unspeakable crime. He raped her while she lay defenseless. When Melissa finally woke up, groggy and confused, she found herself lying naked in Fred's bed. Realizing what had happened, she screamed in terror, her cries piercing the silence of the house. But Fred, desperate to silence her, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy axe he used for his forestry work. In a fit of panic, Fred swung the axe down, striking Melissa and ending her life in one brutal blow. Blood splattered across the room, and Fred stood there, panting, the weight of his crime sinking in. But it wasn't over yet. Realizing that Jennifer and Charlie would return soon, Fred knew he couldn't let them find out what he had done. His mind raced with panic and fear, but a dark resolve began to form. He decided there was only one way out. He had to eliminate them too. Fred stood in the quiet aftermath of his brutal crime, his hands trembling as he stared down at Melissa's lifeless body. He knew there was no turning back now. His mind was clouded with fear, but also with the cold realization that the only way to escape this would be to kill Jennifer and Charlie when they returned home. It wasn't long before Jennifer and Charlie arrived back from their errands. They walked into the house, completely unaware of the horror that had just taken place across the street. Fred watched from his window, gripping the axe tightly as he prepared for what he had to do next. He waited until the sun had fully set, the darkness covering the quiet suburban street like a blanket. A storm was beginning to brew outside. The wind howled, and distant rumbles of thunder echoed across the neighborhood. As the night deepened, the power went out, a blackout caused by the fierce storm. The timing couldn't have been worse for Jennifer and Charlie. Fred moved quickly, slipping out of his house and across the yard. The darkness hid his presence as he made his way to their home. He quietly entered through the back door, which Jennifer had forgotten to lock in her rush to unload the groceries. Inside, the house was silent, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Jennifer was in the kitchen, lighting candles due to the blackout, unaware that Fred was lurking in the shadows. As she turned her back to the door, Fred approached silently. With one swift, calculated movement, he swung the axe down, catching Jennifer off guard. She barely had time to react before she fell to the ground, the light of the candles flickering over the gruesome scene. Fred felt a twisted sense of resolve wash over him as he turned his attention to Charlie, who was upstairs in his home office, still working late into the night. Fred crept up the staircase, each step carefully measured, as the storm outside grew fiercer, masking any sounds he made. He could hear the faint clicking of Charlie's keyboard as he worked, completely oblivious to the terror that had just unfolded downstairs. Fred stepped into the room, his axe gripped tightly in his hand. As Charlie finally noticed him, it was too late. Fred brought the axe down with terrifying force. Charlie tried to fight back, but Fred's rage, fueled by his desperation, was overpowering. Within moments, it was over. Charlie lay lifeless on the floor, next to his desk. With both Jennifer and Charlie dead, Fred's panic began to subside, replaced by the chilling realization that he had just wiped out an entire family. He knew the police would be coming for him soon, but he wasn't ready to face the consequences. Grabbing his axe, Fred fled into the stormy night, disappearing into the dense woods near the edge of the neighborhood. For days, Fred was a fugitive. The police quickly discovered the grisly scene inside Jennifer and Charlie's home, as well as Melissa's body in Fred's bedroom. The neighborhood was thrown into chaos as news spread of the horrifying murders. Search teams scoured the nearby forest, but Fred knew how to hide. He had spent years working in the wilderness as a forester, and he used his knowledge to evade capture. Fred lived in the woods, moving from one remote area to another, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. But the net was closing in. The police found evidence of Fred's whereabouts: a discarded shirt, traces of blood, and slowly but surely, they began to narrow their search. After weeks on the run, Fred's luck finally ran out. A team of officers tracked him to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Fred, realizing he was cornered, tried to fight his way out, but it was no use. In a final standoff, Fred charged at the officers with his axe, but he was gunned down before he could strike. His reign of terror was over. The neighborhood would never be the same. The once quiet, peaceful street in Houston was now marked by the memory of an unimaginable tragedy, one that no one could have predicted. The murders of Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind a trail of grief, horror, and unanswered questions. Fred's story became infamous, the tale of a man driven by lust and desperation to commit unspeakable acts, and the deadly consequences of secrets kept hidden for too long. Fred's death brought an end to the immediate terror, but the aftermath left scars that would take years to heal. In the days following the standoff, investigators pieced together the tragic events that led to the brutal murders. The neighborhood, once a symbol of suburban peace, became the backdrop for a dark chapter in Houston's history. The media swarmed the area, dubbing Fred the Axe Killer of Houston, and the story captivated the nation. News outlets detailed how a once respected forester had descended into madness, driven by a twisted affair with his neighbor's wife and a horrific act of violence against their daughter. The investigation revealed more than just Fred's rage-fueled attack. Detectives uncovered Jennifer's secret relationship with Fred, which had lasted for months under Charlie's nose. Neighbors had noticed Jennifer's flirtatious behavior, but no one suspected how far things had gone. Jennifer's friends were shocked to learn that she had been involved with Fred, a man who they barely knew outside of his quiet, solitary life as a forester. For Charlie, the signs had been there. The bruises, Jennifer's distant behavior, the late nights where she claimed exhaustion, it all made sense now. He had been too focused on his work to see what was happening right in front of him. His friends and colleagues would later reflect on how he had seemed tired, even stressed, in the weeks leading up to his murder, but no one could have imagined the secret life his wife was leading. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Fred's crime spree had been meticulously planned after his brutal assault on Melissa. After drugging her and committing the unspeakable act, Fred panicked when she began to scream, forcing him to take the ultimate step to silence her forever. From there, he knew there was no turning back. The moment he picked up the axe, he sealed his fate. In the weeks following the murders, Houston was gripped with fear and disbelief. How could such horrific events unfold in a seemingly safe, ordinary neighborhood? Reporters interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, all trying to make sense of what had happened. The local police department held multiple press conferences, detailing the extensive search for Fred and the tragic conclusion to his reign of terror. Even though Fred had been killed by police, questions lingered. Could anyone have prevented this? Were there signs of Fred's instability that had been ignored? And most hauntingly, how had Jennifer's choices set in motion such a violent chain of events? The Engel family, distant relatives of Charlie and Jennifer, expressed their grief publicly, describing the unbearable pain of losing not only Charlie and Jennifer, but Melissa, an innocent girl caught in the middle of an unspeakable crime. They called for the community to heal and move forward, but the trauma would take time to fade. As time passed, the houses on that once peaceful street in Houston remained haunted by the memory of Fred's crime. Neighbors moved away, unable to bear living in the shadow of such horror. For those who stayed, the sight of Fred's house, now abandoned and boarded up, served as a chilling reminder of how quickly life could turn from normal to nightmarish. The story of Fred, Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa would be told for years, a tragic tale of infidelity, betrayal, and murder that shocked not only Houston but the entire country. The once ordinary neighborhood would forever be linked to the bloody events that unfolded during that stormy night, and the legacy of Fred's madness would never be forgotten. In the months following the murders, the neighborhood slowly began to heal, but the scars left by Fred's rampage were deep. The media attention eventually faded, and the abandoned homes stood as grim reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Investigators wrapped up their case, but many in the community remained haunted by questions that would never fully be answered. Jennifer's friends struggled with their grief and confusion, trying to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one who had engaged in a dangerous affair. Some whispered that Jennifer had been manipulated by Fred, while others believed that her actions had played a pivotal role in the violent outcome. The truth was likely somewhere in between, a toxic combination of lust, betrayal, and deceit that spiraled out of control. Charlie's colleagues at his accounting firm were similarly shaken. Many of them had worked closely with him for years, and the idea that someone as stable and grounded as Charlie could be pulled into such a deadly web of secrets left them feeling vulnerable. His funeral was a somber affair, attended by those who had known him best, but even in death, his story was overshadowed by the lurid details of the affair that had led to his murder. The Engel family, now in charge of settling the estate, had to sort through the remains of the lives that had been so violently cut short. They sold the house, unable to bear the memories that lingered in every corner. Fred's house, too, was sold at auction, though many in the neighborhood believed it should have been demolished. The new owners painted over the walls and replaced the floors, trying to erase the evidence of the brutal murders, but the shadow of Fred's actions would always hang over the property. As for Fred, his name became synonymous with horror. Years later, true crime podcasts, books, and documentaries would pick apart the story, dissecting every detail of his life and the events that led him to murder. Psychological profiles were drawn up, attempting to explain how a seemingly normal man could commit such heinous acts. But for those who lived through the terror, no explanation was sufficient. The Houston police, praised for their swift action in tracking Fred down, remained tight-lipped about the final moments of the standoff. Some officers privately admitted that Fred's death was a relief, a way to bring an end to the nightmare, but others wondered if more could have been done to prevent the loss of life. Had there been warning signs missed? Could Fred have been stopped before his violent outburst? For years, the story of Jennifer, Charlie, and Melissa Engel, and their tragic entanglement with Fred, would be remembered as one of Houston's most chilling crimes. It was a tale that exposed the darkest sides of human nature: lust, betrayal, and unbridled violence. Houston, Texas, once known for its quiet suburban neighborhoods and close-knit communities, now harbored a dark stain that would not fade with time. Fred, the man who had butchered his neighbors, left a legacy of bloodshed and heartbreak in his wake, one that would ripple far beyond the houses he haunted with his presence. The crime scene in this typically peaceful community was beyond disturbing. The once pristine home of Charlie and Jennifer, where neighbors had gathered for barbecues and the sounds of children's laughter had filled the air, had become the site of unimaginable horrors. The three bodies of the Engel family lay scattered across the house like twisted remnants of what once was a loving family. Their dreams and aspirations died that night with them. Fred's violent spree had ended only when law enforcement finally closed in on him. After days of tracking him through the dense woods and forests around the outskirts of Houston, the search had been grueling for both the authorities and the town. Fred, the once quiet and seemingly harmless man, had become the embodiment of a primal savagery that no one had seen coming. Yet the anger that boiled within him had been simmering for years, as investigators would later discover. He harbored a deep-seated resentment toward the life he saw from across the street. It wasn't just about Jennifer, it was about everything she and her family represented: wealth, stability, and a life he could never have. Jennifer had been the spark that set his dark desires aflame. Their illicit affair was an escape for both of them, though it quickly became something far more sinister. For Jennifer, Fred offered a dangerous thrill, a secret world away from the responsibilities of her home and her husband Charlie, whose long hours and emotional absence left her craving something more. For Fred, however, Jennifer represented something much darker. She became an object of obsession, a symbol of all the things he believed he was owed. Their affair had begun innocently enough: a few stolen glances over the garden fence, a brush of hands as they helped each other with chores. But soon it became clear that Jennifer was drawn to Fred's raw masculinity, and Fred, always the predator, knew exactly how to manipulate her desire. Their trysts, hidden from the prying eyes of the neighborhood, became the focal point of Fred's life. He waited, he planned, and he obsessed over her. And when the relationship turned from physical into something far more emotionally charged, Fred's perception began to warp. In his mind, Jennifer was no longer just an object of lust, but a possession, something that belonged to him and him alone. The weekends, the hours spent in passion, were enough to keep Fred satiated for a time. But as the weeks dragged on and his obsession deepened, Fred started to become possessive. Jennifer, however, viewed Fred as nothing more than a side fling. Charlie, despite his inattentiveness and constant work commitments, was still the man she wanted to keep her stability. She saw Fred as an escape, a temporary reprieve from the monotony of her daily life. Fred, on the other hand, began to see Jennifer's actions as betrayal. When Jennifer pulled away from Fred after months of their secret meetings, everything began to unravel. She started to feel the weight of her infidelity, and the guilt gnawed at her. Her daughter, Melissa, was growing up, and Jennifer feared what might happen if she got caught. Fred sensed the shift in her demeanor: the fewer calls, the shorter texts, and the excuses. Fred, paranoid and spiraling, began to imagine scenarios where Jennifer was with Charlie again, or worse, with someone else. His jealousy consumed him. But the true breaking point for Fred came when Melissa unwittingly stepped into his path. When Melissa showed up unexpectedly at his door that day, she had no idea she was walking straight into the lion's den. To Fred, Melissa was an extension of Jennifer, and when he drugged and assaulted her, it wasn't just an act of perverse lust. It was a way to exert control over Jennifer, to punish her for daring to pull away. The moment Fred took Melissa's life with the axe, the facade of the man he had once been, the neighbor, the friendly handyman, was gone. In his mind, the only thing left was destruction. He could not allow Jennifer and Charlie to live after what had transpired. He imagined Jennifer's betrayal, her rejection, as a direct attack on him, something he had to repay in blood. As Jennifer and Charlie returned from their shopping trip that stormy evening, completely unaware of the horror that awaited them, Fred was already in their house, lurking in the shadows. The storm that raged outside seemed to mirror the fury inside Fred as he waited for the right moment. The power had gone out in the neighborhood, the perfect cover for Fred's deadly ambush. Charlie entered the house first, calling out for Melissa, unaware that the last time he would speak his daughter's name would be in vain. The lights flickered for a brief moment, just long enough for Charlie to see Fred standing in the darkened hallway, holding the bloodied axe. Fred wasted no time. He swung the axe with savage precision, striking Charlie down before Jennifer could even scream. The house filled with the sound of thunder as Fred turned his attention to Jennifer. She was paralyzed with fear, backing away slowly, her mind unable to comprehend what was happening. This man, this lover who had once been her escape, had turned into her executioner. Jennifer tried to run, but Fred was faster, stronger, driven by a rage that could not be quelled. He struck her down with the same methodical violence, each blow a twisted release of his pent-up fury. By the time Fred was finished, the once picturesque home was a blood-soaked nightmare, and Fred, now consumed by his madness, fled into the storm. For weeks, Fred eluded capture, hiding deep within the Texan wilderness. He knew the terrain well, and he used that to his advantage. The police scoured the area, but Fred had become like a ghost, vanishing into the dense woods before they could even get close. The search became a nationwide manhunt, with Fred's face plastered across news stations and billboards. The public was terrified this man, a once trusted neighbor, had turned into a cold-blooded killer, and he was still out there somewhere. Finally, after weeks of running, Fred's luck ran out. The police cornered him in an abandoned cabin on the edge of the forest. There, with nowhere left to go, Fred made his last stand. The details of his death are murky. Some say he fought until the bitter end, while others claim he surrendered in silence, exhausted by the weight of his crimes. Either way, Fred's reign of terror was over, but the damage he had done would never be forgotten.